I'll introduce myself. My name is Linda Eaton, and I have the honor to serve on the board of the Textile Society of America. So this is session 9C, and the topic is lace and education. I am not going to give long introductions to all of our speakers, as you can find information about them all in the full program, but I will introduce them very quickly. I will ask you if you have questions, and we encourage questions, to put them in the Q&A and not in the chat box at the bottom. So I will be recovering things from the Q&A at the bottom. And we will hear all of the talks first and then go back and revisit questions. And so you can ask questions to all of the speakers or individual speakers as you so wish. So our first speaker is Joan Savarino, and Joan is an anthropologist, folklorist, educator, consultant, and a visiting scholar at the University of Pennsylvania. And I think, Joan, I introduced you 2 years ago.
I think so, yes.
The previous one. And so her talk is entitled Maestra Melina, Calabrian Lace Maker, Creative Artistry and the Education of Girls. So over to you, Joan.
So thank everyone for coming today. And first of all, preface to my talk, I'd like to thank Anna Zurzolo for the introduction to the Speranza family and for her use of some photographs, which are indicated at the bottom of the slide, the particular slide. Anna urged me to visit Melina because she was one of the extreme elderly. She was 99 when I visited her in July 2017. She died in July 2019. This paper focuses on the life and artistry of Melina, Maestra Melina Speranza, who was an expert lace maker of local renown, and her star pupil, her niece, Maria Rosaria. Maestro, or maestra in regional language, is an honorific reference used for a person skilled in a particular art or trade. Melina's long life reveals a complex hidden story, one of a gifted woman with great will and fortitude who successfully led a creative life of her own choosing in spite of obstacles. Melina's life must be understood within the lens of a Calabrian sociocultural context of the early 20th century and mid-20th century. I traveled with my cousin from Cosenza to the village of San Martino, you can see the arrow, in the province of Reggio. And San Martino is not indicated, but Tarianova is there. And it's essentially a suburb. San Martino today is typical of small towns in the south that have yet had another exodus of the young since the economic downturn of 2008, a repeat of successive waves of migration since the late 19th century. This continues a tragic history, with the contemporary situation being that many of the smallest villages are totally abandoned, as Calabrian anthropologist Vito Tetti has documented. The southern regions have an unemployment rate of nearly 50% of youth between 18 and 34 years old. While the economic infrastructure is poor in the south due to a complex history, villages still have a strong social network. Melina lived with her niece's family on a dusty street lined by modest facades. At the Speranza entrance, we were greeted by Maria Rosaria, seen in the middle, the niece, and her mother, Sara, in the ebullient way that Calabrians have of making one feel as if they have waited their entire lives to meet you. Maria Rosaria ushered us into her impeccably kept and beautifully appointed home. At the entry to the living room were these intricate handmade lace bonbonniere made by her. These are favors made for festive occasions such as weddings, baptisms, and graduations. Until merely a generation ago, nearly every woman achieved at least a minimal embroidery facility. What we were shown that afternoon, however, was a level of lace-making expertise rare even in the South. When I met Melina, she was only assisted by her cane. She was tiny and stooped with clear eyes and a sweet countenance. As soon as she sat down, she became quite animated and talkative, clearly excited by our visit and interest. We had been warned that her memory had begun to fail a few months previous to our arrival. Although she did repeat herself at times and was a bit deaf, she was clearly still very engaged in daily life. Melina still did everything for herself and insisted on it. No doubt this tenacity helped her maintain her hold on life. Melina was born on January 27, 1918, at the end of World War I. She was one of 4 children. Here she is 3 years old, sitting on her mother Concetta's lap. When she was 4, her mother died suddenly of fulminant bacterial meningitis. Her father, Antonio, unable to care for the children, sent Melina and her younger sister to an orphanage in Messina, Sicily, where her aunt was the mother superior. There she studied embroidery under the tutelage of the Catholic sisters. As an adult, she never married and lived with her father until he died. After Melina's father's death, she moved to San Martino and lived with her nephew, Maria Rosaria's father. She became depressed. This letter here on the left is from her aunt at the orphanage, who was like her mother and with whom she remained bonded. In the letter, her aunt expressed concern at Melina's deep sorrow on returning to her native town. She had a difficult time establishing community because she spoke standard Italian, whereas the townfolk only spoke regional language. They mocked her. She was offered a government job as a postal worker, which would have meant an income and a pension. She turned it down, however, saying that she preferred making lace. She dedicated herself to her embroidery. She said she was content when she worked. By way of further explanation, she told me, "Era la mia poesia." It, she said, meaning lace, was my poetry. Melina found she also loved teaching children. Parents began sending their girls to her to learn to embroider. Melina told me, "It was my town. I had to teach. I was happy that I could teach them." Over many decades, she used her prodigious talent as a fulcrum to educate girls. During our visit, her one remaining pupil, a woman in her 30s, arrived and proudly showed us an embroidery piece she was working on. The story of Melina's life is one of an intelligent and talented woman who expressed her creativity through one of the only artistic outlets available to Southern Italian women in the past. I have discussed in a previous paper at this conference how in the early 20th century, weaving and embroidery were symbolically linked and together embodied the Southern Italian feminine ideal. As Jane Schneider wrote about Sicily, and I have found to be generally true for Calabria as well, embellished whitewear, biancheria, became the primary component of trousseau by the end of the 19th century. Embroidered biancheria became a symbol of social position linked with the concept of female honor and the preferred form of stored wealth. This ideal is connected to the Mediterranean code of honor and shame and referred to gender-related qualities that distinguish the ideal moral characters of men and women. Why this occurred is complex, but for the purposes here, it is important to note it because of its ramifications for social values as well as women's production. All girls learned to embroider because embroidery exemplified purity and social status. While wealthy girls had huge trousseau, every girl had to have a supply of household linens in order to marry. Melina taught all San Martino's girls embroidery, but she also schooled them in reading and writing. She also taught the men to read and write, or at least to be able to sign their name on a document. At times, she had 50 pupils of different ages at once. And this is her room in the 3rd floor where she lived that shows where the schoolroom, this was the schoolroom. They brought their lunches and stayed the entire day. They brought their trousseau or corredo, with them so they could embroider it under her instructions and supervision. The tradition of a trousseau continued, if only for symbolic reasons, not out of necessity until very recently. Melina was extremely patient, the result being that the children loved her. There were a few wealthier girls who brought the material to her, and she embroidered the trousseau for them all, for those girls. Most families could not pay her in cash, but used the traditional bartering system, reimbursing her in foodstuffs such as olives, oil, and oranges, in which the area is rich. Melina confirmed that recompense didn't matter to her because she toiled out of love. The importance of Melina's dedication cannot be underscored enough, given that a formal education was not considered important in an earlier period. Women were expected to marry and have children and were not allowed to leave home prior to that. Even Maria Rosaria, born in 1978, finished high school, but her father forbade her to attend college. And this is true of a couple of my cousins of Maria Rosaria's age who live in Cosenza as well. And it varied from family to family, because another cousin did go to college. Melina's 3-room studio on the 3rd floor here was where she spent her time. The largest room was this schoolroom where she taught as many as 50 students at once, as I said. Maria Rosaria's father wanted to finish the rooms. You see they're unfinished. Room is unfinished. But Melina forbade it. She didn't want them bothering her materials. And so out of love and respect for her, the rooms remain in an unfinished state. This adjacent room to the previous one was Melina's office. At one end was her desk, and along another wall, lace journals were stacked in neat piles. The orphanage nuns, a common practice, taught the girls from patterns in these kinds of magazines and journals, and she saw them as essential. Memorabilia from many decades covered her office walls, including things children made for her, religious pictures, and prayer cards. A lot of older Italian women that I interviewed in Calabria, their walls often looked like this. Here's another wall in that room and a piece of her lace that she made, tape lace. Through the office, we entered Melina's workroom, which held all her lace and the patterns that she had created over the years. Here is where she made patterns, cut fabric, and stored her patterns in books. When she was younger, she had no time during the school day to develop her own creations. She devised a routine in which she drank coffee all day and night to stay awake, allowing her to work late into the night on her own projects and tracing patterns. This is one of her hand-drawn templates. Maria Rosaria learned lace making under her aunt's tutelage from the time she was about 3, and she became her aunt's best protege. She said that when she found the l'uncinetto crochet difficult, Melina made her stick with it, telling her she had to learn well. Now, she said, lace making has become her passion too. The 2 women were very bonded emotionally. As Maria Rosaria grew up, she helped her aunt teach the children. A few years ago, however, they stopped teaching. With changing mores, there were only a few who came. Maria Rosaria said they couldn't learn because they had no attention span. They only wanted to look at their phones constantly. Maria Rosaria, however, is carrying on Melina's legacy. Maria Rosaria brought out many boxes of lace to show us her own handiwork. These are 3 pieces she made between the ages of 10 and 12 years. She had to practice different stitches, and so they are a combination of erba, stem, catenella, chain, spina, spine or backbone, and also some work with attached beads. In addition to embroidered lace, she crochets and makes bobbin lace. Now, some of the photographs are a little bit blurry or dark, because we took them in the house, and so did Anna Zorzolo. So they're not the best photographs, not as if you would take them at a museum with proper lighting. Maria Rosaria's armadio, or closet, here is seen with her trousseau. This is typical of most Italian women her age or older. All pieces must be washed and ironed by hand. Therefore, she uses them only occasionally. I have heard this same story over and over because although no longer truly the stored wealth of an earlier period, such objects of beauty are too delicate, too expensive to produce for daily use. Today, a dowry and handmade whitework linens that were once a mandatory part of it are not required. Many women, however, still cherish ones handed down or those they receive as gifts or make themselves. One middle-aged Calabrian woman told me that sometimes she goes into her bedroom, pulls out drawers, and just looks at hers. This is a ring pillow made by Maria Rosaria for her own wedding bands. Linen cutwork with initials in punto pieno, or satin stitch. It was commonly used in Italy, satin stitch or punto pieno, from the 1800s until today. Traditionally done on white, as was true for trousseau linens, symbolizing purity. This is a bomboniere, or a wedding favor. Maria Rosaria made 220 of them for her wedding guests. She was helped by Maestra Melina and Maria Rosa and their students. This technique is punto pizzo rinascimento, or Renaissance. It's a tape lace, and she described that she first worked on cardboard, then connected it by needlework, and then lifted it off the cardboard. Here's another bomboniere. This one was a graduation favor using intaglio, or cutwork embroidery. Here's an infant blanket that Maria Rosaria made in pure linen with punto antico and rete filet, network filet. Before a child's birth, as in preparation for a wedding, the linens are chosen and embroidered. So punto antico is a relatively recent term from the early 20th century, and it encompasses basic elements of different techniques, such as satin stitch, curl stitches, overcast stitch, open work, and drawn work generally used in the work areas. Today, it's largely done as a counted thread technique, and sometimes it's done with fabrics, patterns are traced on fabric, and then with the counting threads and pulled out. Here is a baby blanket of wool muslin with lace valance, embroidered in punto in seta, silk stitch, and punto pieno, satin stitch. It is referred to as a silk stitch because the stitch's final effect is silky. Colors are used more freely in modern times, but also because it's for a baby. Maria Rosaria likes to go to flea markets where she hunts for antique lace, which she attaches to her own pieces. This is a baby layette, or correndino, she made for her infant son. This particular one is probably worth, she says, about $2,000 US. The fabric is 100% silk. The lace valance is from France. As I said, she incorporates antique pieces sometimes in her work. And the thread used is silk, which she bought near Bari in Puglia, where silk is still produced. The fiocco di nascita shown alone at right is embroidery that is hung on the hospital room door and house door when an infant is born. Here's another fiocco di nascita. This is a linen sheet, spelled good night here, in satin stitch or punto pieno, and punto, also using punto rinascimento at the edge there. In Maria Rosaria's bedroom hangs this large embroidered drapery she made. It is done in pizzo cantu, bobbin lace, intaglio cutwork, and punto giorno, or type of hem stitch. Another example of filet, which is built on a net and the space is filled in with embroidery. It's many of you are probably familiar with this. In 2018, I received an announcement from Maria Rosaria that the town, along with the family, was hosting a 100th birthday party. In typical Southern Italian culture, it combined the sacred, a mass with the bishop came and blessed Melina, and secular aspects of birthday party. It was a tribute to acknowledge that the many years of service Maestra Melina gave to the townspeople, especially its women. Here they are arriving at the party. And here they are in church. Sara, Maria Rosaria's mom, Melina, and Maria Rosaria. Melina was honored by her community. However, hers is truly a hidden story. In a patriarchal society where Southern Italian women were relegated to the domestic sphere, Melina found a niche for herself, albeit within it. During the time period in which she grew up, if she had married, she would not have had the option to devote her entire life to her own creative endeavors and educating others. Here's the 100th birthday cake. And Melina celebrated her 101st birthday in January 2019. You see the thimble there and the needle and thread symbolized on the cake. Melina, she died, as I said, in the summer of 2019. Melina was an exemplar of the way Southern Italian women negotiated their prescribed social roles to carve out an intellectual, creative, and social space of their own. I should say some did. She left behind a legacy of intricate lace production, original patterns, and 3 rooms filled with memorabilia that she had carefully preserved. Maria Rosaria has carried on her legacy. I want to say that as a closing statement, that I feel strongly that these women's lives should be documented. And I have been working on that research for many years and am continuing it, because these are women whose lives are never really haven't been known or discussed. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Joan. That was very, very interesting, and what lovely work. Our second speaker is Elena Kanagy-Loux, and Elena is the collection specialist at the Antonio Ratti Center at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And her talk is Per Pane e Piacere, the examination of the Denison House lace sample book.
Okay, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And wow, Joan, that was a beautiful talk. I really enjoyed it. I have to say the entire lace community is so thrilled that there's a whole panel of lace at the TSA conference this year. So it's really exciting to be a part of that. So first of all, I want to thank Lauren Whitley, Pam Parmel, and everyone at the MFA Textile and Fashion Arts Department who supported my research of this sample book in their collection. And I also want to thank everyone at TSA for organizing this conference and including me in it. Today, I'm going to examine the Denison House Lace Sample Book as a case study in philanthropic lace organizations in the US in the early 20th century, and the impact that these organizations had on women's lives. Offering handmade lace for sale not only boosted the income and morale of underemployed craftspeople, mostly recent immigrants siloed in tenements within wealthy American cities, but also preserved regional lace-making traditions from obsolescence. However, written documents reveal an underlying tension between the wealthy benefactors who ran the organizations and the women that they employed. Almost since the origin of bobbin and needle lace in the late 15th century, lacemakers have struggled from low pay and inconsistent work and have relied upon charitable organizations and government to support to survive. And I was going to mention some case studies that in examples in Italy and in New York City, but actually the talk after me is going into that in much more detail. So that's fantastic. Beginning in the Renaissance, lacemaking was seen as a noble and virtuous occupation for women, as it could be done in the home, and the white linen threads required clean surroundings and good personal hygiene to execute beautifully. By extension, therefore, lacemaking was sometimes seen by Western colonial powers as a, quote, civilizing practice taught to native and foreign-born women alike. Even within the field of textile history, the stories of lacemakers have yet to be researched in great depth. The class, gender, immigration status, and lack of guild organization of lacemakers has resulted in limited extant records about their identities, With my presentation, I hope to uncover the names and stories of a few lace makers forgotten to history and attempt to bring a modern perspective to the complicated hierarchies of labor that are still relevant today. When Denison House was founded in Boston in 1892, it was the third of its kind in the US, created with the goal of providing a space for community members of all backgrounds to gather, connect, and even better themselves. Writer and philanthropist Vida Scudder was one of the founders, as well as the primary administrator of Denison House until 1913, and was also involved in the creation of the Folk Handicrafts Council. The Denison House lace sample book was donated to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in 1942 by Florence A. Chase, a master needlewoman that worked with the Folk Handicrafts Council from 1918 to 1920. With the goal of fostering friendship between Americans and Italian immigrants in Boston through social events, the Circolo Italo-Americano was formed under the umbrella of the Denison House. This social club grew so large, quote, grew so large and flourished so happily that at last it spilled over into one of the large Boston halls and held a forum for Italian and American lectures and discussions on all sorts of topics, such as Italian and American history and politics and education and art, by which the two races might learn to understand each other better, unquote. It might seem alarming to us now to read about a perceived racial division between Italians and Americans, but this was a typical attitude of the time. By 1908, there was already a class of Italian lacemakers organized as part of the growing women's subgroup Alleanza Femminili at Denison House. One of the most popular events of the Circolo Italo-Americano was an annual event of arts and crafts held in the first week of December, which included painting, sculpture, clay modeling, wood carving, inlaid work, floor and wall mosaics, bookbinding, and illuminations, embroideries, and laces in an exhibition for the public. In response to the resulting consumer demand, for the objects on display, the annual exhibition was quickly made permanent to both showcase and sell the products. In 1910, the Folk Handicrafts Council was established to manage the production of lace and embroideries, and a supervisor was found to distribute work amongst the women. In a letter from Mary Cove Smith from 1910 to an unknown recipient, she explains that, quote, "We want to provide a clearinghouse where the Italian worker may bring his labor and where the American consumer may turn to find the product of it. We know that in the 60-odd thousand Italians in our colony, there is plenty of ability to produce under direction all the beautiful handicraft for which we could find sale," unquote. The letter emphasizes the desire to ensure that traditional craft be passed down within Italian communities and asks for help in finding skilled lace makers and other artisans to participate in the program. Ms. Smith notes that they, quote, "do not mean that we can furnish a living by these orders and are not attempting to establish industries, but some women have time to spare at home," unquote. However, over 6 years, the Folk Handicrafts Council grew to employ 300 women from Italy, Armenia, Greece, and Syria who worked in bobbin lace, needle lace, crochet, and embroidery. The group took as their motto, "Per pane e piacere," or "for bread and for pleasure," highlighting the dual financial and social benefits of the organization. The Folk Handicrafts Council advertised both in English and Italian publications to sell their wares and to entice new makers to join their workforce. An article in the Denison House annual report of 1916 explains that the lace makers, quote, "come to us from all over the city and nearby towns. Sometimes a woman brings her next door neighbor and offers to teach her friend if we are willing to give her work," unquote. The women's reasons for seeking work varied from a sick or out of work husband to a desire for pocket money of her own. Additionally, some sought friendship and companionship in a foreign land or suffered from, quote, "a nervous condition that will be cured by doing beautiful work that will be praised and paid for," unquote. The Denison House annual report goes down to break down the income generated by the Folk Handicrafts Council, which grew from $1,245 paid to 30 workers from 1912 to 1913 to $10,496 paid to 249 workers from 1915 to 16. An article in House Beautiful magazine includes a different and much sadder and heartbreaking origin story of the Folk Handicraft Council. While a Denison House member was visiting her neighbor, she was told that a family upstairs was in desperate need of her help. Quote, "She found a woman desperately ill with her dead baby beside her. In the next room lay the woman's husband, too sick to lift his head from the pillow. When the situation had been relieved, when the man and woman were both well again, and the man had come to work, his wife came to Denison House, and the terror of the recent experiences was still in her eyes. "I want to work too," she said. It developed that she could make exquisite crochet collars. The residents at the house bought them of her, then friends of theirs bought them until the woman had earned a really substantial sum, unquote. Although the House Beautiful article insists that the organization does not dole out charity or pity and praises, quote, the matchless touch of skilled hands, unquote, it also describes the lace makers as, quote, a procession of dogs to the humanitarian doctor's door, unquote. This attitude exemplifies the complicated dichotomy between the good intentions of the benefactors of Denison House and the sometimes patronizing and prejudicial attitudes about immigrant women, even in praise. The Denison House Lace Sample Book not only served as a catalog to advertise lace made by women working for the Folk Handicrafts Council in Boston, but rather as a clearinghouse of lace made by organizations all over the US. The lace is organized by technique and is predominantly made up of bobbin lace, but also includes sections of various types of needle lace and crochet. It is assembled in a ledger with columns indicating the maker, the size of the thread used, the pattern, the pay for the worker, and the selling price. Many of the patterns in bobbin lace are made in the style of Italian lace from the Renaissance, such as these braided edgings that resemble patterns from the first ever bobbin lace pattern book, Le Pompe, published in Venice in 1557. It was common practice in philanthropic lace organizations of the late 19th and early 20th century to make use of earlier patterns and even to replicate them precisely, but some later patterns are included as well. What is notable about the Denison House Lace Sample Book is that many of the makers are actually named, although I was not yet able to identify all of them. One better known Boston lace maker that is included is Teresa Pellegrini, whose torchon bobbin lace work is seen here on the right. On the left, she has sent a letter to Florence Chase with a sample attached using a new linen thread she was given and asking Florence Chase's opinion on the resulting bobbin lace. Teresa Pellegrini was also a member of the Society of Arts and Crafts Boston, where she is listed as a lace maker. In a letter dated July 21, 1938, which was later published in the National Old Lacers Bulletin, now the International Organization of Lace, Mrs. Pellegrini tells another lace maker, quote, "I have given my whole life to lace making, and in my time, I have handled the most beautiful pieces in this country, mending and cleaning some are centuries old, and always I am very busy with this work," unquote. Another well-known name, at least within the lace world, that shows up on a letter in the sample book is that of Marion Powis, owner of the Devonshire Lace Shop in New York City. The attached high-quality bobbin lace samples use the finest thread in the book and are made in a variety of techniques, including English Bedfordshire and Honiton laces, French Lille and Cluny laces, and Flemish Banche laces, all bobbin lace. With a background in art and several awards for lace design under her belt, Marion Powis opened the Devonshire Lace Shop at 60 Washington Square in 1916. Offering antique lace, new handmade laces, and lace repair and remodeling services, her collection was world-renowned and her clients included J.P. Morgan and museums such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art. After demand for antique lace dried up and she was forced to close her shop in 1946, she published one of the greatest lace books of the 20th century, Lace and Lace Making, in 1953. These samples are from another well-known philanthropic lace organization, the Sybil Carter Indian Lace School, which was founded in 1904 and ran until 1926. Born in 1842, Sybil Carter was an Episcopal missionary who moved to the White Earth Reservation in Wisconsin in 1890 to instruct Ojibwe women in lace making. Most of the lace was bobbin lace, like these samples, but Battenberg tape laces and needle laces were also taught, for which the women were paid between 50 cents and $1 per day. Lace made by Ojibwe and Oneida women won a gold medal at the Paris Expo of 1900, and eventually a shop was set up in New York City to sell the lace to consumers on the East Coast. Despite the success of the organization, which sold 1,000 pieces of lace and 4,000 yards of edging in 1918, the indigenous makers were excluded from promotions to better paid leadership roles, which were reserved for white women. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Sybil Carter is documented as having some truly unsavory opinions of the Indigenous women that she taught, referring to them as, quote, nothing but bundles of dirty rags, unquote, and referring to their traditional crafts as dirty and ugly. She saw lace making not only as a profitable way for them to earn a living, but also as a way to assimilate Indigenous women into white Christian settler culture. The patterns designed for the Sybil Carter Lace School often depict stereotypical images of, quote, Indians and teepees, such as the one seen here. However, some members of the Ojibwe and Oneida communities have come to incorporate lace making into their own traditions and continue to make lace on their own terms. Although we can assume that the majority of the lace made in the Denison House sample book was made by women, there are a few samples included that were made by men as well. These torchon bobbin lace edgings have a note that they were made by soldiers in Colorado Springs as part of a class organized by the Red Cross. According to an article in the Bulletin of the Needle and Bobbin Club, quote, a class of lace makers was organized by Mrs. B.W. Trousdale among women whose husbands or sons were in the United States service and men who were physically unable to do heavy work, unquote. A sale of the lace was held and successfully sold out of their product, bringing in a profit of $150. Further plans were made to instruct injured men returning from World War I in lace making, quote, in order that they may be provided with a cheerful occupation and at the same time have a means of improving their finances, unquote. But the success of the project is unclear. There are, of course, numerous other examples included in the sample book from unnamed origins. An annual report of Denison House describes the way in which the work was distributed amongst needleworkers employed by the Folk Handicrafts Council. Finished work was returned on Thursday afternoons and examined by judges for errors before any payment was approved. Finished work was rarely turned away, but occasionally it needed to be corrected. The women were paid for the time spent on their work and received a new pattern and thread for their next design with a slip indicating how much they would be paid. Quote, then her piece of crochet is placed in the pile of incoming work ready for the sterilizer, a precaution we take before offering any article for sale, unquote. Quote. Although cleaning lace upon completion is a pretty standard step, as the white threads can become dingy from extensive handling, the use of the word sterilize is an unsettling indicator of prevailing attitudes that immigrant women were unhygienic. In fact, Denison House had an entire program dedicated to hygiene, a problem which arose due to the poor conditions of cramped tenement housing rather than as a personal or moral failing. However, as the motto Per Pane e Piacere indicates, the women who participated in the folk handicrafts program did not only do so to earn money, but also to build community and fraternity. The annual report paints a lively scene of Syrian, Greek, Armenian, and Italian needlewomen coming together to appreciate one another's finished work. Quote, admiration is spontaneous, and admiration for the work naturally engenders admiration for the worker. We all grow to think less of racial and national distinction. The Mediterranean countries seem very near indeed. A new patriotism comes to us. More and more we say, my country is the world, my countrymen are all mankind, unquote. Although I have not yet uncovered records from the perspective of the women workers who participated in the Folk Handicrafts Council, I hope that I have been able to paint an honest, three-dimensional portrait of the organization. While the motives of the benefactors of Denison House and other similar philanthropic lace organizations were well-intentioned, in some cases, such organizations primarily empowered the white middle class and upper-class women who ran them. Some contemporaries of Denison House even struggled to draw the line between charitable handicraft organizations, which were seen as virtuous, and exploitative piecework or sweatshop labor. During an unprecedented time in which artisans and makers around the globe are struggling to find work and to survive, the issues of charity versus mutual aid that empowers the maker have been thrown into sharp relief. It is important that we continue to use a critical eye when examining not only history, but the modern-day garment and textile industry around the globe. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent, and I am so glad that so many of these so far untold stories are getting researched. I think it's really important that these groups of women are getting better known. So Holly is the Director of Education and Outreach at the Intermuseum Conservation Association Art Conservation, the ICA. and teaches museum studies for Johns Hopkins University and Case Western Reserve University. Rob, and I am very proud to say, is a graduate of the Winter University of Delaware program in art conservation, so forgive me for bragging, and serves as the Associate Textile Conservator at Cleveland Museum of Art. And the title of their talk is Fragments of Lace, Marginalization and the Creation of Collections. So Holly and Robin, over to you.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizers for all the hard work they did to transition this conference to an online event. My co-presenter, Robin Hanson, and I are grateful for the opportunity to share this story with you today. And Elena, I look forward to talking to you and Joan. It's so nice to find people. For more than 50 years, graduate students in the Cleveland Museum of Art, Case Western Reserve University Joint Program in Art History and Museum Studies have experienced unparalleled access to collections and to museum professionals, curators, conservators, and educators. In 2011, in my role as adjunct faculty member in charge of graduate museum studies for the program, we introduced a month-long module in conservation and preservation that included lab visits, examinations of artworks, and conversations with conservators. This was done with the assistance and advice of the entire Cleveland Museum of Art conservation staff under the direction of Chief Conservator Per Knudus. The conservation module culminated in a one-on-one experience with a conservator. Students learned to write detailed descriptions, condition reports, and care and handling guidelines for works of art. This year, the Cleveland community is excited to welcome Sarah Scaturo as the new Eric and Jane Nord Chief Conservator at the Cleveland Museum of Art. We hope to be able to continue the practice of lab visits in the future once the pandemic is past. My co-presenter today and co-collaborator on this research is the fabulous CMA Associate Conservator of Textiles, Robin Hanson. Robin has welcomed classes into the Textile Conservation Lab and supervised a number of students in textile-focused projects. A former student, Lauren Lovings-Gomez, now a PhD candidate at Rice University, is presenting work done under Robin's guidance in a concurrent TSA session. Beginning in 2015, Robin and I began to focus on the stories of a small group of collections in the museum associated with women as collectors and shepherded by women professionals, several of whom were women as well. Together, we developed a course, Lost Narratives, Materiality, Marginalization, and Women's Agency in the Changing Landscape of Museums. Our presentation today focuses on one of these lost narratives, the story of the creation of the lace collection at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Recovering lost narratives raises the question, why or how do they become lost? One simple answer might be, history moves on, people who were once significant cease to be remembered. But actually the answer to the how and the why is more complex. Historian Asher Sela, in his work on the 19th century Russian educator Elena Comparesi, ascribes the loss of these narratives to a trend among historians who prefer to describe larger, more generalized collective patterns and mainstream activities rather than the actions of minority groups like women who are marginalized in societies. The need to describe bigger collective patterns privileges the group or the institution over the individual. This is particularly true in museum histories, where they define institutional history in terms of directorates, significant collectors, and collections, or more recently, by using large data sets, the infamous big data, to draw visual conclusions that are momentarily satisfying, but lack a certain human element. The human element, the people and personal networks and serendipitous events that led to the creation of collections, are often left undescribed. The narrative is simplified and much is lost. This morning, we would like to reintroduce you to the story and the people behind the Cleveland Museum of Art's lace collection. Today, the museum visitor, present company accepted, finds it difficult to imagine the care and thought which went into choosing lace that could transform a garment into something new and wonderful, or to appreciate the tablecloths, napkins, and runners that once filled hope chests. The reform of the Mass, Vatican II, in 1962 has ensured that generations have grown up without an appreciation for the extraordinary efforts and expenditures historically used in the creation of luxury goods for the church. Thus, there are few today with an understanding of the importance of these textile collections, and fewer still interested in the networks of women and men crucial in the development of lace collections, which are seldom displayed. The story of Cleveland's lace is far more rich, complex, entertaining, and inspiring than the fragments of the story that can be gleaned from labels and existing catalog records. Before we talk about the who, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Robin Hanson to tell you a bit about the textiles and lace collection at the Cleveland Museum of Art. By the numbers. Take it away, Robin.
It is fitting that the first artwork acquired by the Cleveland Museum of Art and accessioned into the collection in 1914 was a textile, a piece of American embroidery and drawn work, the collar seen here. Today, the CMA textile collection includes more than 5,000 textiles from 62 countries created over 4 millennia. Of significance is the particularly fine lace collection, much of it acquired by the museum in the roughly 2-decade period between 1914 and 1936. Today, the textile collection includes slightly under 1,200 accession pieces of lace. Roughly 30% of the lace collection, about 488 pieces, was deaccessioned. The next 4 slides will highlight 6 lace collections received by CMA. Together, these collections illustrate just how rich CMA's lace collection is. The museum's lace collection began in 1914 with the acquisition of about 1,000 pieces of lace and lace tools, collected by Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Wilson and displayed in Chicago in 1893 at the World Columbian Exposition. The display board seen here on the right is representative. Because this board contains roughly 16 items, we presume the other boards also contain multiple objects. This would account for the difference in numbers between the 303 accessioned objects and the documented collection size. The second lace collection, received in 1919 and 1920, included 88 pieces largely from Spain, from the collection of Merda Leonora Jones. The Ida Schiff collection, numbering 440 pieces of lace, was added in 1920. This collection included many examples of early Italian needle lace, such as the reticella, collar, and cuffs seen on the left. In 1923, the children of Ellen Garretson Wade, known as Nellie, gave CMA 81 pieces of lace, including the nearly 5-foot square, 1.4 meter square needle and fillet lace cloth seen on the right. 2 additional gifts will not be discussed in this paper but are worth mentioning. 79 pieces of Flemish and French lace, including the flounce seen on the left, were given by Mrs. Edward Harkness in memory of her mother-in-law between 1930 and 1948. In 1936, Frances McIntosh Sherwin gave 240 pieces of lace, including the 16th century needle and bobbin lace cloth seen on the right. These gifts together comprise more than 75% of the current lace collection at CMA.
In order to understand the story, we're going to return to the Thomas Wilson collection, the collection for Thomas Wilson and his wife. He was born in 1832 and practiced law in Iowa for much of his life. When he retired in 1881, he was appointed the American Consul to Ghent, Belgium, and would later hold similar positions in France. An amateur archaeologist, upon his return to the United States in the 1890s, he was appointed curator of archaeology at the Smithsonian. Seen here are illustrations from an 1896 volume he wrote on the pictorial use of the swastika. Wilson died in 1905, and the lace collection ended up at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and Mrs. Wilson's name was disassociated from it. In 1914, Frederick Allen Whiting, the first director of the Cleveland Museum of Art, was attempting to build a collection. He remembered the Wilson collection, knew it belonged to or was being stored at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. Whiting was familiar with textiles and the textile industry. He'd grown up in Lowell, Massachusetts, and taught immigrant textile workers. Whiting asked J.H. Wade, one of the museum's major benefactors, who was in New York at the time, to go take a look at the Wilson collection. Wade went, found it in storage, and persuaded the staff to show him a part of the collection. In a note to Whiting, he wrote, quote, "We succeeded in seeing a dozen of the frames. I got the large illustrated catalog and was satisfied the collection of about 1,000 pieces, large and small, would be a desirable lace nucleus for our museum and have decided to buy it," unquote. The catalog is still in the collection of the Cleveland Museum of Art. Sadly, only one of the 1,000 pieces collected by Wilson and purchased for the Cleveland Museum of Art by J.H. Wade remains in the collection today, the 19th century bob and lace pillow you see here. J.H. Wade and his family play a significant role in the story of Cleveland's lace collection. Here is Wade with his grandfather, the original J.H. Wade, who is holding his great-grandson, J.H. Wade Jr. The elder J.H. Wade made his first fortune as one of the founders of Western Union. Other fortunes followed in railroads, banking, mining, and manufacturing. Also seen here is the younger Wade's wife, Nellie, who along with her husband, mother, and mother-in-law, developed a passion for collecting textiles. Grandfather Wade had donated 83 acres of parkland to the city of Cleveland in 1882, reserving 6 to 8 acres for a purpose later to be determined. But it was his grandson's dream for Cleveland to have an art museum in that spot, particularly after an 1889 trip to London and Paris that included visits to the South Kensington Museum and the exhibitions at the Exposition Universelle. The elder Wade died in 1890, and the newly independent J.H. Wade commissioned the Wadena, an ocean-going steam-powered yacht. For much of the next decade, the family traveled the world, genuinely collecting objects for the planned museum. During this period, the family's interest in lace was primarily as a luxury good for personal use. What they collected for the museum were embroideries, jewelry, metalwork, arms, ceramics, paintings, and prints from around the world. For a variety of reasons, Cleveland's plans for an art museum were not realized until 1914, when Frederick Whiting was hired to oversee the construction of the collection and a building. It was during this period that Whiting called on Wade's assistance with the Wilson collection. When the museum opened in 1916, therefore, the lace collection consisted primarily of the Wilson collection. But thanks to the Wade family and others, the overall textile collection had grown by leaps and bounds. Over the next few years, while the First World War raged in Europe, a small number of lace pieces were added annually to the collection. This changed in 1919 with the acquisition of a collection of Spanish lace and an enthusiastic decorative arts curator, William M. Milliken. Milliken was the son of an Irish father and a Scottish mother. Both came from families involved in the production of linen. Milliken's father and older brother ran a linen import business in New York City, while he went to Princeton, where he discovered art and art history towards the end of his college career. In 1913, he was offered a 6-month unpaid internship with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Within 3 months, he had a paid position as an assistant curator of decorative arts. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Milliken enlisted. In 1918, he returned to the States to find his job at the Met had been given to another in his absence. Friends working behind the scenes helped him secure a position at the Cleveland Museum of Art in 1919. Surely it was either the new young curator of decorative arts or the director who encouraged Miss Myrta Leonora Jones, translator of Italian books, age 50, to give 88 pieces of primarily Spanish lace to the museum's decorative arts department in 1919 and 1920. With these gifts, Milliken began to actively collect lace for Cleveland. The next year, 1920, would see an even bigger lace prize for Cleveland, courtesy of an old friend and colleague from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Francis Morris. During his tenure at the Metropolitan Museum of Art between 1913 and 1917, Milliken had been taken under the wing of the enigmatic Francis Morris, assistant curator of textiles. At some level, the young man's rapid ascent from unpaid intern to assistant curator must have annoyed Morris. She had worked for 14 years to obtain the title of assistant curator, which was given to Milliken after only 3 months. From Morris, Milliken learned about lace and embroidery, though his family history in the textile industry may also have shaped his interest. Sometime in early December 1920, Milliken received a telegram from Morris. She encouraged him to come to New York City as quickly as possible because an important collection of lace, the Schiff collection, was being offered for sale. What was it about the Schiff collection that caused Milliken to get on a train a few hours after receipt of Morris's telegram? The next player in our story is a young woman, German by birth, named Ida Medspaker Schiff, née Feisman. One of Ida's brothers was co-owner of a leather business in Florence, Italy. In the early 1870s, Ida married his business partner, Luda Medspaker. She was 19 years old. The couple settled in Florence, where they became part of the small, prosperous, educated, elite Jewish community that had been granted full citizenship after the establishment of the Kingdom of Italy in 1861. Ida was 30 in 1883 when her husband died, leaving her with 4 young children. The Jewish community rallied around Ida, who soon married Hugo Schiff, a successful German Jewish chemist at the University of Florence, 20 years her senior. At some point toward the end of the 19th century, Ida Schiff developed an interest in antique lace and began collecting. This may have been because she was personally interested in lace, or it may have been associated with Schiff's philanthropic work. She is said to have established one of the first lace schools in Florence to teach traditional lace making. Educated elite Jewish women at the time were discouraged from practicing philanthropy within their own communities, and so focused their efforts instead on secular philanthropy in areas of health, education, and welfare for children and women. Schiff's second husband was an avid socialist and supported the Italian working man, and so his wife's work might be seen as a parallel to his own. Queen Margherita of Italy, the wife of Umberto I, was a patroness for a series of schools or centers across Italy to teach young women and girls traditional handicrafts, including lace. It is unclear if Ida Schiff's work to educate young non-Jewish women in traditional lace-making efforts was affiliated with the Queen's efforts, but Schiff did allow her personal collection of antique laces to be used as study samples. And in 1900, Schiff loaned her lace collection to the Castel San Angelo in Rome for an exhibition. After the exhibition closed, the Italian government wished to purchase her collection, but she refused to sell. Photographs of works from Schiff's collection appear in Elisa Ricci's 1913 Old Italian Lace publication, as well as in the Italian arts journal Empress. Schiff's collection included many rare early pieces of lace and became well known globally through these reproductions. Following the death of her husband in 1915 and the devastating World War, sometime in 1918-19, Schiff decided to sell the collection. Thinking that her lace might fetch a better price in the United States, the collection came to Manhattan. Which brings us back to December 1920 and Francis Morris's telegram to William Milliken. We know that the collection was being offered in its entirety at two different prices, $7,500 for a museum and $10,000 for a private individual. Morris's original intent was not that either Cleveland or the Metropolitan would buy the whole collection, but that she hoped they would be able to convince whomever planned to buy the collection to sell Morris and Milliken the choice pieces. Milliken got on a train for New York with approval to spend $1,500. Milliken wrote to J.H. Wade just a few weeks later to tell the story of his early December adventure. Quote, and Milliken was very melodramatic. The next morning, I went to the Metropolitan to meet the man who had made the offer for the Schiff collection. He was very disagreeable, and although he stayed for nearly 3 hours, we saw plainly that he was trying to withdraw from his bargain. He was not an ordinary lace dealer and could not appreciate the actual value of the collection. When he left, Miss Morris and I were completely discouraged. Enter Mr. Breck, who is the acting director of the Metropolitan. He telephoned 15 minutes later that he was bringing Mrs. Bovey of Minneapolis down to see the collection. When he looked over the prices, he became enthusiastic as he had not seen them before. Mr. Breck said he thought he could get $3,000 from the trustees and asked me how much I had. I told him $1,500. Mrs. Bovey said she would be willing to take $1,500 worth also. Mr. Breck then said the Metropolitan, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and Mrs. Bovey ought to buy the entire collection. He asked if Cleveland could give about $3,000 to make up the $1,500. I said yes, feeling certain that the accession committee would support me as it was an extraordinary case. I never dreamed that you would be willing to add to your gift. I received Mr. Whiting's reply the next morning and we began to divide the pieces, unquote. As he had done in 1914, Jephthah H. Wade stepped up to provide the necessary funds for Milliken to purchase 2/5 of the Schiff collection for the Cleveland Museum of Art. Morris wrote to Milliken after the purchase, quote, I think we are all to be congratulated upon acquiring this collection before it got to market. For as you know, the prices we have figured on are those stated by Madam Schiff in her inventory. And as nearly as I can estimate, Cleveland and the Metropolitan will each have in the neighborhood of 400 specimens costing less than $8 each, unquote. At least 75 of the pieces, which ended up in the permanent collection of the Cleveland Museum of Art, are illustrated in Elisa Ricci's Old Italian Lace. Now, we know that Mary H. Smith negotiated the sale on the behalf of Schiff, but we didn't know who Mary H. Smith was. Who was she? After searching through shipping and census records, Rob and I believe that the likeliest candidate may be Mary Harris Smith, an Englishwoman, an accountant, a suffragette, and supporter of women's needlework cooperatives. In May 1920, Harris became the first woman admitted to the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, like America's CPAs. Although she would have been 76 at the time of the Schiff sale, indications are that Mary H. Smith may have been in the States to assist American women in their fight for the right to vote. I'm proud to say in May of this year, 1920, on the 100th anniversary of her achievement, a coveted blue plaque was placed near the site of her London offices, and she is one of only 3 women to have this honor. Morse and Millikan both wrote articles about the acquisition of the Schiff collection in their respective museum publications in February 1921. The Schiff collection was that significant. A year later, Millikan wrote a series of 3 articles for Antiques magazine on the topic of lace and its development, which appeared in May, July, and October, all lavishly illustrated with images from the Schiff collection. There's one last piece of our story today. J.H. Wade's wife, Nellie, had died in 1917 at the age of 58. In 1923, her children, Jephthah H. Wade Jr., George Garretson Wade, and Helen Wade Green established the Ellen Garretson Wade Memorial Lace Collection with 81 pieces of lace. Millikan called the gift the most important single accession in the collection of lace that Cleveland has ever received. Other gifts would follow, but with Jephthah H. Wade's death in 1926, this period of intense lace collecting came to an end. A new board advocated for the collection of masterworks of painting and sculpture. In 1930, Director Whiting left the Cleveland Museum of Art to become the president of the American Federation of Arts. William Millikan was named the second director of the Cleveland Museum of Art. He would jointly hold the titles of director and curator of decorative arts until his retirement in 1958. Lace has traditionally been made by women and girls. Their work has been purchased and collected by women like Ida Schiff, Myrta Jones, Ellen Garretson Wade, and unknown numbers of women whose names we don't know. The curation and care of lace and other textiles in museums has often fallen to women like Frances Morris, because lace seems less significant than collections of painting and sculpture. But at the time, women still required the support of men in positions of power, men like Breck, Millikan, Whiting, and Wade. Thus, the creation of the Cleveland Museum of Art collection of lace, as we have seen today, was a collaborative effort. So lace is seldom on display in museums today for reasons alluded to at the beginning of this presentation. Events such as Dior's use of Italian lace in a recent runway show, and the work of the Polish artist Nispoon, whose work is seen here on the facade of a museum located inside a converted 19th century lace factory in Calais, makes us hopeful that perhaps lace's time has come again, and we will begin to see more of these collections on view. On behalf of Robin and myself, thanks for listening to our story today.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. And I too hope that more lace gets displayed. And so our final speakers are Ruggero Ranieri and Maria Luciana Buseghin.
Right.
Ruggero is the chair of the Romeyne Robert and Uguccione Sorbello Foundation, which is an educational organization that supports the forging of cultural bridges between the United States and Italy. Maria Luciana is an anthropologist, essayist, and researcher in textile arts and women's history. Their talk today is entitled Artistic Philanthropy and Women's Emancipation in Early 20th Century Italy in the Life and the Work of Romeyne, Robert, and Carolina Amari. And I'm hoping that I haven't completely butchered those names. So over to you both.
Okay. Thank you very much. Tryphosa Bates Batchelor, a young American writer and socialite, visited the premises of Industrie Femminili Italiane in Rome in the winter of 1905. The creation of Industrie Femminili Italiane was the culmination of a process starting around 1870, soon after the unification of Italy, consisting in the revival of handicraft skills in embroidery, textile, and lace making, deeply embedded in the popular culture of a variety of Italian localities. It was fostered by the patronage and initiative of a number of enlightened upper-class women encouraged by members of the royal family. It was clearly inspired by the taste for neo-medieval and neo-Renaissance motives sparked by the arts and crafts movement across Europe and the United States. Finally, it fitted with the new awareness of the issue of female emancipation being designed to provide working women, often of peasant extraction, an avenue towards professional and personal advancement. All these threads, philanthropy, the revival of the decorative arts, women's emancipation, are inextricably woven together. Coming back to Mrs. Batchelor, she commented on the leading role among the patrons of Industrie Femminili Italiane of 3 American women. And I quote, "Here are 3 of the most energetic workers of this society, the Countess Brazzà, the Marchesa de Viti de Marco, the Marchesa di Sorbello, all bearing long and noble Italian names, who are an honor to womanhood for the energy and ability they have shown in advancing the condition of women in the country which they have adopted as their own." In fact, the 3 ladies mentioned were only a few among the American women involved. Looking at the biography of my grandmother, Romeyne Robert, I will try here to speculate briefly on their particular contribution. Romeyne belonged to an upper middle class family from Germantown near Philadelphia. She was well educated and interested in music and the arts. Her New York friend and writer Natalie Smith Dana, in her autobiography, Young in New York, which was published in 1963, describes their intellectual friendship in the years of growing up in an increasingly prosperous and enlightened East Coast America. Romeyne, traveling widely in Europe, particularly in Germany, France, and Italy, had come to speak 4 languages. She painted and had a musical talent. She was not interested in finding a suitable husband, rather in developing her own career. In fact, she did end up in marrying an Italian marquis, meeting him apparently by chance at a theater performance in Rome. As soon as she settled down in the family estate in Umbria, she struck a close partnership with the sisters Francesca and Carolina Amari, who were among the leading textile artists and designers of the time. On one side, Romeyne sought inspiration to create innovative patterns of embroidery, culminating in the successful punto umbro o sorbello. On the other, she trained and organized the women of the family estate of Pischiello, turning them into the skilled workforce of a laboratory which, at its peak around 1910, employed over 100 women. Also, Romeyne worked tirelessly to bring to life many other textile communities across Umbria, selecting and categorizing their specific patterns into distinct, well-defined schools, which were then brought together in a cooperative by the name of Arti Decorative Italiane. Finally, she was active in marketing the products of her own and other schools, carrying their samples to a number of international exhibitions and fostering contacts with the United States. In this slide, you can see a number of women of the estate at work. In the next slide, you can see the villa on the Pischiello estate, where the school was, the embroidery school was first created. And on the next slide, you can see a sample of the particular creation of that school, the Punto Umbro Sorbello, of which my colleague Luciana Buseghin will be speaking more later. And this is the work I mentioned by Natalie Dana, a very, in my view, very enlightening book. The work of Romeyne can best be understood by relating it on one side to progressive ideas generated across the Atlantic at the beginning of the new century, focusing on a new role for women, on the importance of art, on progressive methods of education. Romeyne was friendly with the educator Maria Montessori and pioneered her methods in a small country school created on the family estate. This is an interesting story, but I haven't got time to develop it here. Secondly, Romeyne's Italian experience was inspired by the movement of the settlement houses on the East Coast. It is not a coincidence that it was the same Carolina Amari, who you can see now in the picture, who set up embroidery classes for young immigrant women during her stay in the United States. With the sponsorship of prominent personalities in the Italian-American community, such as Miss Florence Colgate and Gino Speranza, she created the New York Scuola di Industrie Italiane in 1908. Thirdly, there is clearly in Romeyne an entrepreneurial fervor which set her apart from the prevalent Italian culture of the time in high social circles. This she had inherited from her own family. Her grandfather Christopher Robert, having made a fortune as a trader, had then spent most of it in philanthropic initiatives in the Middle East. The Ranieri di Sorbello School of Embroidery and the cooperative Arti Decorative Italiane lasted well over 30 years. They came gradually to a close when both my grandmother and Carolina Amari, having reached old age, and also were also confronted with the difficult trading environment of the 1930s, which made sales to the US nearly impossible. In one of her last letters, Romeyne told her sons to display her collection as a set of museum pieces, entitling it to Carolina Amari, whose creativity and untiring commitment she valued enormously. A small embroidery room in the House Museum at Palazzo Sorbello in Perugia now attracts many visitors. A number of pieces from the Ranieri di Sorbello Embroidery School are now held by the Cooper Hewitt Museum, which also holds pieces of the Arti Decorative Italiane and by the Scuola di Industrie Italiane. The MFA in Boston holds an important sampling of embroideries by Carolina and Francesca Amari. The legacy of Romeyne is far from dead, given the interest of many women, often the descendants of the workers in her school, in keeping up the textile and embroidery local tradition in Umbria.
Between 1902 and 1904, Romeyne Robert conducted with her friend Natalie Smith Dana a research across the territory in museums and libraries to find traditions and iconographic sources of the basis of which to create a textile business that gave work to peasants of the Pischiello estate. As a result, in 1904, she created the School of Embroidery Scuola Ricami Ranieri di Sorbello. The school specialty became the sorbello or Umbrian stitch, a knotted stitch in relief created by the artistic director Carolina Amari, who elaborated it from the ancient Portuguese stitch, discovered by her in the collection of Countess Edith Rucellai of the Women's Industries Committee of Florence. The definition of a sorbello stitch corresponds to a complex of different stitch, knots, interlacing, scallops, knits, which Carly. The sorbello was often combined with the needle ivory stitch, with which connection inserts and finishes are worked. The ivory stitch is also an ancient lace. The work was done with thick linen yarn, raw cream, green, indigo, rust, or with cord and twine. or Umbrian canvas in hemp or linen or mixed. Both the embroidery and the canvas bottom are very sturdy and do not fear washing or wear. In the school were produced all type of product and processes: centerpiece, saddles, tablecloths, coasters, curtain, handkerchief, pillows, bed blankets, handbags, brush holders, and cosmetic bags. Many textile artifacts were decorated at the corners with tassel, copies of those found in the ancient collection, taking up the colors of the embroidery and increasing the effect. Amelia Pompili taught stitches and gave drawings, yarns and canvas to the workers who made it at home by piecework. The drawings, elaborated by Carolina Amari and Romeyne Sorbello and inspired by medieval Renaissance motifs. They were taken from ancient pieces, paintings, or watercolors by Romeyne. Each artifact was made of modulus that made up a specific motif, and each worker had her own specialization in embroidery or lace module. In 1911, the school participated in at least 2 exhibitions in Firenze and Torino, where the gold medal was awarded to the teacher Pompili. You can see the workers of the Scuola Ricami Ranieri di Sorbello with teacher Amelia Pompili. Romeyne, with some Perugian ladies, including Countess Maria Baldeschi and Baroness Vittoria Luce d'Anzetta, founded in the early 1920s the Arti Decorative Italiane, a cooperative for the marketing of textile artifacts or 25 schools workshop. Each had its own specialization, and all were under the artistic and technical direction of Carolina Amari. The artifacts were sold in a shop located in an ancient building in the center of Perugia. The cooperative closed at the end of 1929, while the Pischiello school resisted until 1944. 34, excuse me. Both had to close due to financial difficulties resulting from the impossibility of exporting, which had been their main source of income. You can see the donations of Marilena Ranieri di Sorbello to Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Museum, New York. And these are donations to of the School Ranieri di Sorbello al Museum of Tapestry in Bologna, founded in 1966. Now the municipality of Bologna owns the Vittorio Zironi Textile and Upholstery Museum. These are some pieces from the school donated by the Fondazione Ranieri di Sorbello to the Tela Umbra collection in the 2000. You can see Romeyne Robert and Alice Algarte Franchetti. The two women are very, very good friends and collaborated in textile and the educational philanthropic initiative also made also with Maria Montessori. And so the last, the workers of Tela Umbra with the children of the asilo, the company's kindergarten, and the looms room, and some textile of Tela Umbra. This is the fond, the cotton bottom for embroidery. And in the school of Ricami Ranieri di Sorbello, they used always this type of bottom.
So can I ask all of the speakers to come back and be visible, and we will go through the questions that came in while you were speaking in the order that they came in, because I'm not capable of reorganizing it. And so for Joan, Miriam Murphy asks, are the bonbonniere meant to be undone by the recipients and used as doilies, or are they kept tied?
As I said at the beginning of my talk, this was really preliminary research. I was only at Maria Rosaria's house talking with Melina for a few hours. And I have corresponded with her since. I hope to continue my work with her. Melina has died, but I am not sure about the bonbonniere. I presume that some people probably do take them apart and use them, but that's a good question. I don't know for sure.
Great, thank you.
As you can see on her table, she didn't take any of the ones she had apart. She had them as decoration on her little table.
Yeah, that's interesting. Elena, are you aware of any connection between this American Arts and Crafts Society and the arts and crafts movement Ruskin and Morris promoted in England in earlier decades?
I loved this question because actually there's a stack of books next to me right now, and one of them is Ruskin lace and linen work. It's something that I have researched in my 20th century lace research. I haven't found any specific connections between the organizations, but as you've seen throughout these talks, a lot of these leaders in these philanthropic lace organizations were really well connected. Including, women like Isabella Stewart Gardner was also involved with Carolina Amari. There's so many connections globally. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was some influence between them, for sure. They perhaps had seen the success of something like the Ruskin lace and linen industry and were inspired by it, but I haven't found any direct link.
And Amanda Thompson asks if you could share your bibliography again somewhere. So we can share that through the Textile Society website, I think.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. If anyone wants to reach out to me or organize through you, I'm happy to share. It was just a short bibliography, but it was the secondary sources that I thought would be of interest. People were looking into learning more about the things I discussed. So.
And Laura asks if you've researched any other pattern books.
Yes. Le Pompe tends to be the most widely researched and most well-known, and the one that I've spent most time on. In fact, I've made a lot of lace from that sample book. But the other bobbin lace pattern books that I'm interested in are, for example, the Neue Model book by R.M. from Switzerland, also from the 16th century. And yeah, there's so many great ones. My specialty is bobbin lace, so those are the ones that I know, but there are some fantastic needle lace books too.
And so there's another question for you, Elena. Do you have more details on how some Native Americans have incorporated lace making into their traditional arts?
Thank you for this question, Susan. I'm glad you asked, because although I don't necessarily specifically have the answer to that, I do have one of my bobbin lace students has gone on to win a grant through this international lace organization, OIDFA, where she's spending this year researching lace in Wisconsin made by indigenous Ojibwa and Oneida people. So hopefully she will have a better answer than me very soon.
If I could add to that there's a group called the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums, and a question or two on their listserv would elicit that information from across the United States. They're very active. It's called ATALM, A-T-A-L-M.
Great. So I have a question for all of you. you know, we see fashions for different things come and go and rise and fall. What do you think the future interest in lace is? I mean, I'm seeing more and more people becoming interested in lace. And so I'd be interested if you see that too.
I would like to address, because my particular interest, if I can just say something first, it's okay, Linda?
Sure.
You know, my particular interest is working with, in community and researching in a particular town. I work in San Giovanni in Fiore in Calabria in the mountains primarily. And, you know, sadly there too, they have said, well, you know, young kids aren't interested. And so I think for families, for average people, there is a resurgence of interest, it seems, among some. You see it in the US, but I think for passing on traditional work within community, in Italy, at least in the South, it is not happening like it was. And older women are not doing it as much. When I started working in San Giovanni in Fiore in '91, doing research, you know, women were still outside doing it in groups. I don't see that anymore. And younger women are not taking it up, even though they may have collections and some may do it somewhat, but it's just not, you know, fashion is a different issue.
May I address the same question?
Yes, of course. I was going to ask you next.
Now, the question that you asked is the question that I always ask. In other words, why are we keeping all this beautiful stuff? Is anybody going to be interested? The answer is problematic. There is in Umbria, there is quite an interest in these schools of embroidery. There are various schools, and there are people who are continuing their work in one way or the other. There are a number of small museums scattered across the region. There are a number of ladies who keep up the tradition, the stitches, or they invent new things. Whether all this amounts to very much, I'm not clear myself. Whether this has an output into modern fashion. I hear discording voices on this. Sometimes some important fashion house picks up on this or other of these artifacts, but I'm not sure that this develops into a real business. So I'm halfway. I mean, I see a lot of local interest. We have the School of Embroidery of my grandmother, as you saw in my presentation. We have a small museum, and also we have many pieces in the storeroom, and we give them out often to little shows, to small exhibitions. So there is an interest for them, but and there are a lot of ladies who come and ask and want more information, sometimes more than I am able to give them. But so I have a mixed reaction. I think there is an interest. There are people following up. I'm not sure whether this amounts. I mean, Luciana here, my colleague, she always tells me that the real importance of this is in treating diseases, in treating mental diseases, in helping psychological kind of importance of this kind of skill. Now, this might be another avenue. You know, I have an open mind on this. The key point is these are beautiful artifacts. They have an interesting history behind them, and surely I'm going to continue to show them and study them.
I just want to add the hand-eye coordination for children is very important as a training technique for children. And for instance, the Waldorf School teaches crochet and so on. My son learned it as a small child. and he continued knitting for a while, rather. But as Maria Rosaria said, they, quit teaching the kids because they wanted to just constantly look at their phones. And this is what I hear all the time in the US and in Italy. So when you when you have social media is constantly used by children and they can't focus for more than a few minutes at a time, it's a problem across the world right now.
I would love to jump in if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Elena.
I feel like I have a very positive response to this question, actually, that I would love to share. Obviously, I'm in New York City, and my perspective is coming more from around here rather than in Italy. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm the founder of Brooklyn Lace Guild, which is a New York's lace making organization dedicated to making lace by hand. And in 2015, I actually traveled across Europe to interview lace makers for my master's thesis research. So I did, in fact, encounter, like you say, in Burano. I studied needle lace on Burano Island outside of Venice, and they were saying that they were struggling to find young people who were interested. But in other areas, such as in Eastern Europe, like in Idrija and Slovenia, in Croatia, there are many, many young people that are doing this. And I've found that, sure, Maria, do you want me to stop? I just wanted to share some exciting things that are happening in Brooklyn.
Why don't you finish and then we'll get Maria.
Okay.
After.
So what I found is that actually, since launching Brooklyn Lace Guild, we use a lot of social media to connect with younger people. And now a lot of us have gone online on Zoom for our meetings. So we've been able to welcome more people and have online classes, which have encouraged and excited more people to join. And in fact, in using social media as a tool for sharing lace making, as we've done, we've now gotten millions of views on our videos and have thousands of comments from young people who are interested in this, mainly in the US, who've never seen it before. So I think there is a way that this can be used as a positive tool, and there are young people who are really excited about it. I think really the digital media and connecting in that way is the future. And I feel like there's exhibitions in lace all over the place right now. In Ireland, the Headford Lace Project, the Lace Museum in Sunnyvale has online classes. There's so many exciting things happening. I feel like we're on actually the precipice of a big revival.
Yeah. Maria, Luciano, you want to?
Thanks very much. I made a museum in the Tela Umbra in Città di Castello and an atelier museum. They made many courses for children and for disabled, but of textile wave, very few of embroidery. But in this situation, always for therapy, diciamo, never industry, never for money, for, do you understand? No, non hanno capito.
Yes.
Quello che voglio dire. And in Umbria, there are many courses of this quality, but no, diciamo, laboratori for moda, for fashion. Tentativo, come si dice tentativo?
Attempts.
The attempts for fashion are all failed, all not okay. Ferré, La Biagiotti, but always closed.
Yeah, I think as an industry, it's just so costly that it's really hard to maintain. I do have one friend and guild member who has a clothing line made entirely of handmade bobbin lace, or incorporates a lot of handmade bobbin lace from her native Sri Lanka. So she's able to support the community there. But I think as an industry, it's really hard, because historically even you can't really pay people what they deserve in order to, and then have people still be able to afford lace garments. So I did see this week that Fendi is doing a collaboration with Italian bobbin lace makers And at Dior earlier this year, this was shown in the slide, did as well. So there's a little interest, but I think as a hobby, it will flourish, but perhaps not as an industry.
Yeah, Robin and Holly, do you have any comments?
Well, I think I work at a regional conservation lab, and what we're seeing is that people of Elena's age who have significant spare time, we have a maker culture now, and just like there used to be blacksmiths all over the place and a small number of blacksmiths doing really spectacular things, we have a maker group who has rediscovered lace and is doing it at a small level, whatever small means. So, I think it's this cycle that goes, it's very valued. It's not highly valued, right? It was very highly valued in the late 19th century because machine lace was starting to come into play, and which meant that handmade lace. Same thing happened in the print industry when magazines started becoming special, were all over. Then all of a sudden, printmaking, antique printmaking became important. So I'm hopeful that Elena's generation and the makers will help this to survive. I don't know what that meant. I'm sorry. It's Saturday morning.
No, I got it. And you and Robin might be interested to know that someone has asked for any insights on how a contemporary collector would go about donating an antique lace collection to a museum. Are museums receptive to such donations? Do you want to answer that, Robin?
Sure. I think a lot of it is really up to the specific curators in charge. Cleveland was lucky enough to have a textile curator for many years, Louise Mackey, who retired a few years ago. And I think she certainly helped to spread the word of various parts of the textile collection. And we started about 10 years ago displaying this wonderful lace collection in the Renaissance Gallery under the aegis of several curators. That's in abeyance right now, mostly because we're lacking either a textile curator or a curator of Renaissance art. But I'm hopeful that it will come back again and that we'll start displaying the lace once again, because I think that it really did engender a lot of positive comment from the visiting public. In terms of museums and collections that might be open to antique lace collections, I don't know. Linda, do you as a curator have a sense of that?
So I have been fortunate that I was offered a lace collection from a DuPont family member. And what became clear as I was researching it was that it had been misunderstood and they had the wrong generation who was the collector. But the original collector, so the Needle and Bobbin Club of New York went down and visited her and her collection. And they also came to Winterthur at one time. But Winterthur has never, as far as I can tell, never collected a huge amount of lace. So I was thrilled to get this collection from another family member. Every museum has got a different attitude towards acquiring things, and for Winterthur, it's how are we going to use it, so that's when people offer me things, it is that I'm kind of interested in the early machine-made netting that girls were then taught to embroider to decorate, because it was just plain mesh. And there were schools in the 1820s and 1830s for girls to learn how to do that. So, you know, I'm very interested in all of this stuff. So there's a question for Maria, Luciana, and Ruggero. And so in several other presentations at this conference, issues of helping people in underserved communities in some countries in Asia and Africa to produce textile work have come up. What lessons do 19th and 20th century craft and lace education initiatives have for the 21st century efforts? Besides producing beautiful lace, did the early 1900s school have long-lasting effects on the lives of girls and women that they trained? So what a wonderful question.
I know that up to today, I find people who, relatives, descendants of people who worked in that school, my grandmother and other schools of the early 20th century, or let's say the first decades of the 20th century. And they're very proud of what their grandmothers did, and some of them are keeping up the tradition. And I think now there's no particular research on this. It would require a research project to follow up on this. But I'm sure that this had an important effect in terms of the emancipation, self-consciousness of these women. It helped them to start a career of one kind or another, or in any case, it helped them to be more independent from their family environments, from their husbands or their fathers. So I think if we were to research this properly, I think we would get some interesting feedback from this kind of research. Unfortunately, I haven't done it, and I don't know of anybody who's seriously done this kind of work, which would be a field project. But as an impression, I think that this was an important moment for the poor women of early 20th century Italy in underdeveloped parts of the country. Go ahead, Luciana.
Excuse me, I speak very bad. Dunque, there is now in the University of Lecce, two professors are studying a project on 5 women of Salento. One, she was Etta Latrop Danam. She married Antonio De Viti De Marco, Italian economist. She founded with sister-in-law a school of embroidery and a school of textile. And now we are studying for analyze the process of awareness, the effect on the soul, on the mind, and also the story of emancipation in Italy, thanks to this laboratory in various parts of Italy. I studied many years Alice Franchetti. She was of New York and went in Italy. Alice Algarten of New York. She, come si dice sposare?
She married.
She married Leopoldo Franchetti, and she founded a school of textile and many initiatives for children, for educational, and with Romeyne Sorbello. I am studying this now for not, the pieces, because I made the museum, etc., but the change of the mind and the change of the feminine consciousness.
And if I could add, there's a great deal of 19th century research on not the topic of lay schools, but what led the changes in Italy that led to the creation of them, particularly the rise of industry and women going out to work and abandoning children in orphanages with large numbers of orphans who needed something to do was a motivating fact. And then there was a change at the end of the 19th century where women who had been considered breadwinners and had a status as breadwinners in the family, their status was taken away. And so the work that they had been doing at home, spinning or creating straw hats, was literally taken away from them. And so one of the reasons why we needed lace schools was to provide these women whose livelihood had been taken from them and provide them with some sort of livelihood. So there's a vast, long 19th century history of people who are working in that area.
Right, and that's also true in other parts of the world, like Ireland.
And the other thing, if people are interested in, I would encourage you to go look. Our Italian colleagues can read it outright. Most of the literature is in Italian. On the Beatrice exhibition in 1890 in Florence, which was an exhibition of global women's work. And they sent out invitations all over the world, and women from America, women from countries, women in China submitted exhibitions to this exposition that occurred in Florence in 1890.
How interesting. I just want to make sure that I get in, because we're nearing the end, that the Lace Museum in Sunnyvale, California takes lace donations. So those of you who are collectors out there looking for a home for your collections, there's maybe a less positive comment here from Lori Waters. 2 years ago, the USA contingent of the major European OIDFA organization proposed a major congress in the US in 2022 called Lace in the New World, to be held in Santa Fe. It would cover the laces of about 50 countries in the Western Hemisphere, but it was voted down because the membership was elderly and no one wanted to travel to the USA. Well, I have sympathy with people not wanting to travel to the USA these days. But does anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I guess I should say that I'm a friend of Lori, so I'm familiar with this, but I feel like her work and what she's doing and all the lace of the Americas has been underexplored, at least within the English-speaking world. And I think that, and I have full confidence that event will go forward, even if it's not with OIDFA, but in some other format in the future, because it really is so important. So.
Yeah, I would go. Any of you, we've got 5 minutes. Any of you have questions for each other? Any of the panelists?
I'd like to make a comment. Sorry.
I'd just like to comment on Elena's comment about social media. I am amazed at the quality on social media of instruction and clear photographs and videos of how to do embroidery. So that aspect is quite good, and that's happening with cooking as well. So that aspect is excellent. I think that what's not happening, I will reiterate what's not happening really as it was before, is small children learning in community, which I feel learning from online is very different from learning in community. Yeah. And for small children, it's an invaluable exercise. So yeah. But the Zoom is incredible and helped me review some things I learned from my great-grandmother, so.
And Ruggero, you were gonna say something.
Yes, I'd like to come back to the historical part of this narrative. I think it would be very important to compare what was happening on the two sides of the Atlantic. For example, we talked about Carolina Amari, I think there's a lot of research to be done on her work in the United States. She had 2 exhibitions, I think one in Boston and one in New York. And I haven't had time to go into it, but there's some small catalogs. Also, these networks, these transatlantic networks, have not been properly, in my view, explored. Although I can see there's some literature beginning to come out. In particular, I was very interested in the work by Diana Greenwood, and she began exploring some of the things I was interested in. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to put this network in the right context.
Yeah, and Dr. Ruggero mentioned the Countess de Braza.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The catalog that she did for the World Columbian Exposition is available online.
Okay.
And she talks about all the old lace that they borrowed from the noblewomen, but she does a wonderful section on new lace where she credits 14 and 13-year-old girls by their full names. And so, you know, we know a lot of the names of these women thanks to that catalog. Anyway,
Right.
Find it online. It's great. Good reading.
Well, I'm encouraged, I must say. I mean, you know, maybe I'm being a little Pollyanna-ish here, but I'm encouraged because I have seen an increase of interest in lace and lace making. I have had an increase in people asking about our collections at Winterthur, and so I think that we're now, you know, having gone through a period when there were very few people that were interested, I think that we are on an upward slope. And so I thank all of the speakers today. I want to thank all of the people participating for the great questions. And I also want to end by saying that I am now going to be soon going off of the board of the TSA. But I just want to say to people, I have had such a wonderful time being involved in this organization, meeting such interesting people. And so you can still nominate yourself or others. If you nominate somebody else, you want to make sure that they are willing to serve. But I would encourage you to volunteer to be on the board of the TSA and to encourage and support the organization. So thank you very much, all of the speakers again, and all of the participants. I think that this was a wonderful, wonderful panel, and I learned a lot. So thank you all.